Hey guys, Matt Allen here. Welcome back to Tactical Bassin. Today we are talking summertime jig fishing. We're going to talk about 3 different styles of baits, how to make color selections, how to select the right rod, where these fish are, and how to catch them so that when you're out there this summer throwing that jig, you've got confidence that you're doing the right thing in the right places to catch some really nice fish. There are a dozen or more styles of jigs on the market, and there are literally hundreds of jig trailers. The purpose of today's video is to narrow everything down for you. So we're only going to talk about 3 styles of jig, and I'm going to give you some very simple color recommendations. The whole purpose of today's video is to make it easier for you to get out there this summer, fish with confidence, and put jig fish in the boat. So these 3 different styles of jigs, we're going to talk about a finesse jig, a pitchin jig, and a flipping jig. Now we're talking to people all over the country. You could be anywhere right now. So as I talk about the 3 styles, listen to the 1 or 2 that make the most sense for your area. Some of you will be in some really versatile places where all 3 will work. Some of you are going to have some fisheries where it's just the 1 style. That makes it even easier. But when you go out on the water, I want you to have confidence. So we're going to start on the finesse end. We're going to build to the flipping end of this thing. So a finesse jig. The place that you're going to throw a finesse jig is anywhere that you would throw a worm. Around docks, around shallow cover, on rock points, humps, rock outcrops, anywhere that those fish are pulling during the summertime. So we've already talked about that summer split. Some of your fish go shallow, some of them go deep. The fish that go out and go deep, they're not always deep, they're just out. So they could be up on the tops of humps in shallow water. They could be on rocky corners with current. That's a great place for that finesse jig. Your fish that go shallow, if they burrow up into the grass, this isn't your bait. But if you've got docks where they can get up in the shadows, or if they get up around laid down wood, and it's not a lot of wood, it's not really snaggy, it's a prime place for it. So the finesse jig, why do you throw it? Well, it tends to get a better quality bite than a worm. Not always, it will still catch small fish, but it will tend to the larger fish. So if you want to upsize, if you want a shot at a really good bite, going to that jig rather than a worm can be a great move. Color selection, I'm going to keep it really simple. I stay natural. I'm almost always going to start with something with green pumpkin in it. I can't even think of the name of this one at the moment, but down in the video description I'll link all of them for you. But this color, go-to, green pumpkin cross, something with some green pumpkin is really all that you need. I have so much confidence in that. Then my main trailer is just going to be a smallie beaver. Again, green pumpkin. I keep it really simple. What I like to do is I take the first 4 ribs on that bait and I cut them off. What this is going to do is create a really compact profile. And then I, of course, split the tails so that that claw has a little bit of movement. And then just thread that on. And that is my finesse jig. Very low profile, very small, very natural. The fish come unglued for it. I'm going to throw it on lighter tackle. One of the nice things about a finesse jig is though it has a stout hook in it, it's a small hook. So I'm able to throw it on 10 to 12 pound line. Now I prefer braid to leader. You could throw fluoro too, but 10 or 12 pound is all you need to set the hook on a finesse jig. You could probably set on even lighter line than that if you wanted to, but the last thing you want to do is hook a great big bass in the pilings of a dock on something lighter than 10 pound. You're going to lose that fight. So 10 or 12 is ideal. And then a medium action rod is about all you'll need. This is 843, I think, right? 843C MBR. The MBR series of rods, they're really, really light in the tip, so it'll throw a huge range of baits. That's what I've been throwing my Finesse Jig on the last couple of months, and I've been really happy with that. But again, 7 foot, 7'2", 7'3", medium heavy at the heaviest is all you need. You don't need dedicated gear to throw that little guy right there. And as far as fishing it, just pull it, shake it. If you're fishing docks, that's the easiest. Throw right to the pilings, right up in the shade. Let it go to the bottom and sit there and shake it a little bit. If they don't eat it, give it a little pull, let it sit. Pull, let it sit. See, the bite will change day to day. Some days you'll shake it and they'll smash it. Other days they'll all eat it on the drag. So once you've got a feel for what's happening that day, just focus on that one. Pitch to every piling and shake it, or throw right up in the middle of the dock and just drag it out from under there. If you're throwing to specific pieces of cover along the shore or throwing up on rock points, you can do the same thing. You can shake it while you move it, or you can just pull it and you'll get those fish. So if you're in clearer water, if you've got a lot of fish in your lake and you're hoping to upsize, or you just want to get more bites than you would with a bigger jig, Finesse Jig. Number 2, my all-around favorite jig is a pitchin jig. So a pitchin jig is essentially an archy style head, and they're good at everything. That's what I like about them. They are not the best flipping jig made, but they work great for flipping. They're perfect for pitching around cover. You can cast them, you can drag them, you can shake them. You could use it like a finesse jig, although you'll need a little heavier line. They do everything well, and that's what I like about it. If you're only going to carry one jig, it's definitely a pitchin jig. As far as weight goes, 3/8 if you're throwing it in a lot of rock, because that'll help keep it from digging in. If you've got wind though, you want more weight than that. If you're going deep, you want more weight than that. 1/2 ounce is that main size, and then I'll even go heavier than that if you really want to maintain that feel, or if you're getting aggressive, because there's more than one way to work this jig. We'll come back to that. Then again, color selection. With a pitchin jig, I like to stay natural. I focus on those green pumpkins, green pumpkin browns. The only time that I'm going to deviate from that, if the fish are really aggressive, really chomping, I'll try something with some red in it. Or if I'm fishing in murkier water, I'll start leaning into those dark colors, you know, your blacks, black, blues. But again, I start just like a finesse jig. I start in those naturals focused around green pumpkin. And again, in the video description, I'll link you specific color recommendations, trailers, all that stuff to make it easy. Now trailer, again, I go simple. Reaction Innovation Sweet Beaver. Clip the first 4 ribs off the top of it. And again, the reason that I do that, and split the tails, the reason that I'm doing that is to create a compact profile. You ever get to the lake and you're throwing a jig and you get bit clear as day and you reel up and one of your claws is missing or your trailer's pulled down? That's what I'm trying to avoid by making a compact profile. By shortening up the length of those claws, I still get all of the action, all of the positives, but they're a lot less likely to eat just the back of that bait. They're more likely to come in and get the whole thing. It's made a big difference for me for years. So that's my overall profile, a nice compact jig. So that pitchin jig, where do I fish it? Everywhere. I throw it around rocks, I throw it around docks, I throw it around wood, I throw it around grass. Again, if there's just one jig, that's the one. Now, you can, again, shake it on cover, slow drag it. The other thing that I do specifically in the summertime is called stroking a jig, where you really rip that rod and reel up your slack. Then rip that rod, reel up your slack. What the bait will do is it'll jump up off the bottom and settle back down. Jump up off the bottom, settle back down. When I do it, I like to do it in 2 hops. What that looks like to me, if you've ever watched a crawdad in the water, they kind of jump up and then take off. They don't just bolt. There's an actual movement to it. So I like that double hop where that jig jumps up off the bottom and then goes. Stroking a jig can get the most violent bites you have ever experienced. They hit it hard, but you need a heavier jig to do it. So definitely lean to the heavy end on the pitchin jig if you want to give that a try. Now, typically I don't start out doing that. I'll start fishing my jig just like normal, you know, pulling it down a rock point or casting it up along cover. If I'm fishing island tops, throw it out on that island top, just drag it. But if you realize that you've got a school of fish on an island top or on a corner with some current coming around it, anywhere those fish are stacking up, once you know you've got a school, stroking that jig can pull the largest fish out of that school. Just gets a strong reaction bite, almost like a crankbait or another aggressive moving bait. You get the profile of the jig plus that reaction strike. That can equal monster fish. So that is the pitchin jig. Now, as far as rod goes, I've made some changes because I'm always playing with rods. I'm always looking. So 7.2 heavy, 7.5 medium heavy, 7.6 heavy even. Those are the rods I've been throwing on, but I'm always looking because you guys know that I like that more parabolic rod. Just a little more give for a jig makes all the difference. The guys that are losing a lot of jig fish, I feel, well, there's some guys that lose them because their rod's just too soft and they're not getting a good hook set. But most people that lose them are using too stout of a rod. When those fish come up and thrash, that jig's got a lot of weight to it, it comes flying out. So I'm constantly on the lookout for another jig rod. I mean, all year, every year. Every time I go in a tackle shop, I'm playing with rods, looking for more jig rods. Because I'm always trying to find the balance of sensitivity and the action that I need and still get that parabolic bend that will keep that fish hooked up and get them in the boat for me. Because if you've got a rod that will load deeper into the blank, when those fish come up to shake, that rod tip never fully unloads. A stiff rod will just stand back up and they've got slack and out that jig comes. But if you've got a rod that's loaded way up, even when they head shake, it's only coming part way back, keeps pressure on them, keeps that hook in, makes all the difference, especially if you're around big fish. The bigger the fish, the wider that head shake, the more power, the more likely you're going to lose them if your equipment isn't perfect. So the rod I've been playing with this year is actually a Megabass Orochi. I've been really happy with this rod. It's a 7.5. They actually rate it 3/8 to 1 ounce, 8 to 20 pound. But the action is what I'm after. So it's called a brailleist. It's a 7'5". It's in the size range I like. If you guys that have been with us forever, remember I threw that Champion, that 7.6 flip for years and years and years. But that rod was not as sensitive as what I wanted, but it had the perfect action. So I've been looking and looking. So far, I'm extremely happy with this rod. The brailleist, 7'5", excellent sensitivity, really good load up on the fish. I'm gonna keep playing with that one, but I thought you'd wanna know about it. Last but not least, flippin', heavy cover. A flippin' jig is a jig that you're going to be throwing in and around grass and real heavy cover, in brush, in the reeds and tules, grass that comes up to the surface, even matted vegetation. That's where that guy is going to come into play. And I'll throw it all the way up to true punching. You know, a lot of people will punch with the Texas rig, and so do we. But I'm going to tell you right now, if you are a guy that likes to punch, but you lose a lot of those fish, switching to a jig can help you get those punch fish in the boat. Because when you hook a fish on an ounce or more of tungsten on a Texas rig, and those fish come up thrashing, there's nothing to hold that hook in. It's the exact same thing we just talked about. There's nothing to hold it in, and it just comes flying out. When you put a jig in there and you crush that weed guard is putting back pressure against that hook point, and you stand a lot better chance than you do at that Texas rig. The downside of trying to punch with a jig is that it doesn't go through the cover as well. It's bulkier. You've got that big weed guard. You've got a skirt. So you have to go to a heavier jig than you would a tungsten. I typically go up a whole size, either a 1/4 ounce or a 1/2 ounce, to get through the same cover. But if you're punching in that sparser stuff where you're only using 3/4 of an ounce or an ounce, you need to try a jig, because you'll get the same bites, but you get even more of them in the boat. Now, back to just standard flipping, throwing it around cover. The key to a flipping jig is that head shape, that pointed head. That's what's going to split the cover and make room for that jig to come through. Different head styles work differently. If you are in grass, you need a pointed head. Makes all the difference. Color-wise, when I'm flipping, I actually tend to the darker colors and then move back to natural. So the black blues, those dark tones are where I start, especially if I'm punching, then work back to your green pumpkins, your browns, and those sorts of things if they won't eat the darker colors. But again, I'm not necessarily throwing a super bold color. This is black blue, but the color is hematoma. It's not a super bold black blue. It's not in your face. So I can still throw it in fairly clear water with a lot of confidence. But black blue definitely gets big bites. That's a great option. Trailer wise, when I'm flipping a jig, sometimes I stick with a beaver, but a lot of times I want more movement. So I'm going with something like either a kinky beaver, or I'm sure that new spicy beaver would work in the same circumstance, but I haven't actually flipped with it yet. I've flipped a ton with that kinky beaver or rage craw, something that's gonna have a lot of movement on its way down through the grass and through the cover, because a lot of your bites in cover come while the bait is moving, not while it's on the bottom. Those fish that are in there, they know that in that heavy cover, if it gets away from them, they'll lose it. So they lash out immediately, right when they see it, oftentimes on the initial fall. So I want that trailer to be swimming, giving me some motion and looking good on its way in and out, not just when I'm on the bottom. Now, quick tip for you, if you are going to try and punch that heavier cover, instead of going with a wider bodied bait like that, this is actually a man bear pig, same color, but narrower profile. And I'll switch to that man bear pig because if you're trying to get through matted vegetation, it's narrower, it'll slip in and out of that cover better. The tails are still going to hang up a little bit, but the tails are what are giving you the action, so you just roll with that. But that man bear pig on the back, more slender profile, still very bulky when it gets down in there, gets bit really well. And then as far as gear, if I'm leaning to the lighter end of the flipping jigs, if I'm throwing, say, a 1/2 ouncer, just fishing around some of the cover, I'm gonna go with a 7/6 heavy. It's not that parabolic action. We're getting into that stiffer rod, but we're talking about a giant gaff of a hook. It's a monster hook. You've got to be able to bury it. So with that, I go to that heavier rod and then I pull really hard on those fish. If you want a little bit more parabolic, go to the 7/7 heavy. And then if I'm going to the heavy sizes, where we're really, like the 7/6 heavy is amazing. That's what we had those fish on in Mexico. When we were fishing offshore, we were actually using a flippin jig just because it had that giant hook, even though we were fishing open offshore rock structures. It worked so well on that rod. But if I'm going to the heavy heads, then I'm gonna step all the way up to my 711 extra heavy, which is my flippin stick, just like I would my Texas rig, and it works perfectly. But again, when you're using a pool cue of a rod like that, you have got to get that fish from A to B as quickly as possible because they will be unloading that rod. So you've got to be horsing them. If you're letting them come up and jump and thrash, those fish are going to come off. It's a heartbreaker and it happens. So pull hard on them. Summertime is prime time to throw that jig. Today is about keeping it simple. I know we talked about a lot of things, but that's because we're talking nationally. You know which of these applies to your waters. You know if you've got a ton of grass, or if you've got docks, or you've got clear water with smaller fish, or you've got giant fish that like to dig down and cover. So take the one that makes the most sense, apply it to your water. This is the time to throw a jig. Summer jig fishing is amazing I'm sitting here in clear water. I kid you not, I just watched about a 2.5 pounder swim right by. I should probably get to fishing too. I hope you guys enjoyed the video. If you did, hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, make sure those notifications are turned on so you get updates every time there's a new video, and we'll talk to you soon.